Alright, let's see if this works. Alright. If I got to start the sound. Okay. Testing. Alright, looks like it's working. Okay. This is The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross by John M. Allegro. The subtitle is, or the little caption is, Did Christianity evolve from a primitive fertility cult? The controversial bestseller about the origins of Judaism and Christianity, by the author of The People of the Dead Sea Scrolls, it looks like. Sorry, it's kind of fucked up. And the back says, it has a picture of this nice, I'll post it. A Christian fresco showing the Amanita muscaria as a tree of good and evil in the Garden of Eden. The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross. If, as some theologians proclaimed a year or two ago, God is indeed dead, then nothing in the field of religion should be able to startle us anymore. But I'm willing to vouch that John M. Allegro's far-out theory as to the origins of Christ and Christianity will dumbfound the reader. His proposition is simply that the Jewish rabbi we know as Jesus Christ was the personification of a fertility cult based on the use of the psychedelic mushroom Amanita muscaria. Something Burkham, Saturday Review Syndicate. A study of the nature and origins of Christianity within the fertility cults of the ancient Near East. Published in 1970. This is the second printing, 1971. Copyright 1970 by John M. Allegro. Used without permission. Okay. Author's note. This book is the first published statement of the fruits of some years' work of a largely philological nature. It presents a new appreciation of the relationship of the languages of the ancient world and the implication of this advance for our understanding of the Bible and of the origins of Christianity. It will be appreciated that such a statement has to be furnished with the technical data, even though much of it must be outside the scope of the general reader, for whom the book is primarily intended. In order to leave the text as unencumbered as possible, these notes have been gathered in a body at the end of the book, and the numbered references within the text may be safely ignored by the non-specialists, aka me. Acknowledgements. Quotations from the Revised Standard Version of the Bible, copyrighted 1952-1956, are used by permission. Quotations from the Homeric hymns, Pliny's Natural History, and Josephus' Jewish Wars and Antiquities are used by permission of the Loeb Classical Library. Alright, let's get through that. Let's skip the introduction. Blah blah blah. Chapter 1. In the beginning, God created, ... ellipses. Religion is a part of growing up. The reasoning that taught man that he was cleverer than the animals made him also aware of his own deficiencies. Sorry about the wind. He could catch and kill beasts stronger and fleeter than himself because he could plan ahead, seek out their paths, and construct booby traps. Later, that same foresight led him to the art of farming and conserving his food supplies against the seasonal dearths. In the lands of marginal rainfall, he learned eventually the technique of digging and lining cisterns, and civilization began. Interesting. Nevertheless, vast areas of natural resources were outside man's control. If the animals did not breed, there was no hunting. If the rain did not fall, the furrowed earth remained barren. Clearly, there was a power in the universe that was greater than man, a seemingly arbitrary control of nature which could make a mockery of man's hunting and farming skills. Is that collapsing? His very existence depended upon maintaining a right relationship with that power, that is, on religion. Interesting as it is to speculate on the precise forms prehistoric religious thought and ritual may have taken, we have in fact very little direct evidence. The cave drawings found in France, Spain, and Italy tell us little more than the man. Some 10 to 20,000 years ago... Oh, sorry. It's my first time reading out loud in a while. The cave drawings found in France, Spain, and Italy tell us little more than that man, some 10 to 20,000 years ago, was a hunter, and that he may have enacted some kind of sympathetic ritual of slaughter to aid him in the hunt. This practical use of the graphic arts is paralleled today by Australian Aborigines who accompany their symbolic portraiture with ritual mime, dancing, and recitation of traditional epics. Doubtless primitive man of the Paleolithic periods did much the same, but the oral part of his rituals, which alone could adequately explain the drawings, is lost forever. The relics of his plastic arts, relief carving, and clay modeling emphasize his interest in fecundity. The Grecian culture, extending widely over South Russia and Central Europe, and spreading to Italy, France, and Spain, abounds in examples of the so-called mother goddess figurines. These clay models of women with pendulous breasts, huge buttocks, and distended bellies have obvious sexual and reproductive allusions, as do their male counterparts. Doubtless all these had magical religious purposes, but it is not until man has learnt the art of writing that he can communicate with a later age. Only then can we, with any real assurance, begin to read his mind and thoughts about God. Unfortunately, this only happened comparatively late in his development, in terms of evolutionary time, barely a minute or two ago. By then, he was no means quote-unquote primitive. The first known attempts at connected writings were crucifers, registering no more than lists of objects and numbers. But their very existence points to an advanced stage of economic administration, which is amply supported by archaeology. The wonder is that man had been able to progress so far without writing, the one facility we should have thought essential for social progress. How, we are inclined to ask him in our quote-unquote jotting pad age, was it possible to administer a region, farm out temple lands, collect revenues, fight wars, and maintain communications over long distances without easy means of documentation? We are apt to forget that in those days they still had memories. The kind of superhuman results promised the modern subscriber to correspondence courses and memory training must have been commonplace among intelligent people 6,000 years ago. Even today, it is not uncommon to find a Muslim who can recite the whole of the Quran, or a Jew who knows long sections of the Bible and Talmud by heart. The first books, then, were the brain's memory cells. The first pen was the tongue. It was the ability of Homo sapiens to communicate with his fellows, to organize community life, and transmit hard-earned skills from father to son that raised men far above the animals. It was the same means of communication that brought him in touch with his God, to flatter, cajole, and even threaten to obtain the means of life. Experience showed that, as in his human relationships, some words and actions were more effective than others, and there arose a body of uniform ritual and liturgy whose memorizing and enactment was the responsibility of the holy men of the community, and holy men was in quotes. When, around 2500 BCE, The first great religious poems and epics of the Near East came to be written down. They had behind them already a long history of oral transmission. The fundamental religious conceptions they express go back thousands of years, yet there was still another 1,500 years to go before the earliest texts of the Old Testament were composed. It is not, therefore, sufficient to look for the origins of Christianity only within the previous 1,000 years of Old Testament writing, nor to start the history of Judaism with a supposed dating of the patriarchs around 1750 BCE. The origins of both cults go back into Near Eastern prehistory. The problem is how to relate specific details of these comparatively late religions with the earliest ideas about God. Our way into the mind of ancient man can only be through his writings, and this is the provenance of philology, the science of words. We have to seek in the symbols by which he represented his spoken utterances clues to his thinking. The limitations of such study are obvious. The first is the insufficiency of the early writings to express abstract ideas. Even when the philologist has collected all the texts available, compiled his grammars and dictionaries, and is confident of his decipherment, there still remains the inadequacy of any written word, even of the most advanced languages, to express thought. Even direct speech can fail to convey our meaning, and has to be accompanied with gesture and facial expression. A sign imprinted on wet clay, or even the flourish of the pen on paper, can leave much uncommunicated to the reader, as every poet and lover knows. Nevertheless, the written word is a symbol of thought. Behind it lies an attitude of mind, an emotion, a reason hypothesis, to which the reader can to some extent penetrate. It is with words and their meanings that this book is largely concerned. The study of the relationship between the words and the thoughts they express is called etymology, since it seeks the quote-unquote true, from Greek etymos, meaning of the word. The etymologist looks for the quote-unquote root of the word, that is the inner core which expresses its fundamental or radical concept. For example, if we were to seek the root of a modern barbarism like de-escalate, we should immediately remove the D and the verbal appendage ate, slice off the initial E as a recognizable prefix, and be left with scal for further study. The Latin scala means ladder, and we are clearly on the right track. Like escalator, of course. But at this stage, the etymologist will look out for possible vocalic changes occurring between dialects. One of the more common is between L and N, and we are not surprised to find that an early form of the root N in place of L, an early form of the root has N in place of L, so that Sanskrit, one of the earliest dialects of Indo-European, has a root scan with the idea of going up. Sibilants can interchange, also such as S and Z, and short vowels can drop out in speech between consonants, like I between S and C. In fact, we can break down our Indo-European root, scan, ascend, still further into two Sumerian syllables, zig, Z-I-G, rise, and an, A-N, up. Or again, should we wish to track down the root of our word rule, meaning control, guide, exercise influence over, etc., we should find that our etymological dictionaries will refer us through an adaptation of Old French back to the Latin regulo, direct, connected with regno, reign, rex, king, and so on. The root here is plain reg, or the like, and its ultimate source we can now discover by taking our search back another 3,000 or 4,000 years to the earliest known writings of all, that of ancient Sumer in the Mesopotamian basin. There we find our root rig, R-I-G, meaning shepherd, and by breaking the word down even further, we can discover the idea behind shepherd, that is, of ensuring the fecundity, sorry, it's a word I don't use a lot these days, fecundity of the flocks in his charge. So I guess it's like continuance or something, like the safety. This explains the very common concept that the king was a shepherd to his people, since his task was primarily that of looking after the well-being and enrichment of the land and its people. Here, etymology has done more than discover the root of meaning of a particular word. It has opened a window on prehistoric philosophic thought. The idea of the shepherd king's role in his community did not begin with the invention of writing. The written word merely expresses a long-held conception. If, then, in our search for the origins of religious cults and mythologies, we can trace their ideas back to the earliest known written texts, we can use etymological methods to probe even further into the minds that gave them literary form. Having arrived back at the primitive meaning of a root, the philologist has then to work his way forward again, tracing the way in which writers at different times use that root to express related concepts. For of course, the meanings of words change. The more often they are used, the wider becomes their reference. Today, with faster and easier means of communication, this is written in the 70s, it is becoming increasingly difficult to maintain control over the meanings of words, and this is at a time when the need for understanding each other is most crucial. In antiquity, people and ideas did not move quite so fast. Travel was not easy. Remote areas would stay remote over generations, and their languages would preserve old words in linguistic forms long lost in places more open to foreign influence. Religious terminology, which is the special interest of this work, is least susceptible to change. Even though day-to-day words must develop their meanings to accord with social conditions and the invention of new crafts, communication with God required a precise, unchanging liturgy whose accurate transmission was the first responsibility of the priesthood. In the study of ancient literatures, the scholar has to bear in mind that the languages of the hymns and epics may well differ considerably from the common tongue of the same period. One of the problems facing the students of the Old Testament Hebrew is the probability that the classical tongue of the Bible does not accurately represent the spoken language of the ancient Israelites. Certainly, the vocabulary of the Bible is far too limited in extent to tell us much about the workaday world of ancient Canaan. When it comes to analyzing the linguistic and phonetic structure of biblical Hebrew in terms of actual speech, the conviction grows that what we have is not the spoken dialect of any one community living in a single place at one time, but a kind of mixed artificial language composed perhaps of a number of dialects and used specifically for religious purposes. The importance of a liturgical language from our immediate point of view is that it will have been essentially conservative. It is in such writing that we can expect to find words used in their most primitive sense. It's a pretty good theory. If religious terminology in general tends to resist change, this is even more the case with proper names, particularly those of the gods and epic heroes. It now appears that in many cases these have survived unaltered over centuries, even millennia, of oral as well as written transmission. In this one category of words lies the greatest scope for present and future researches into the nature and meanings of the old mythologies. To be able to decipher the name of the god will tell us his prime function, and thus the meaning of the prayers and rituals by which he was worshipped. The difficulty in this study has always been that the names are often very much older than the literature in which they occur, and are indecipherable in that language. So often the commentator on some Greek myth, for example, is that you, Athena? So often the commentator on some Greek myth, for example, has to confess that the hero's name is pre-Hellenic, of uncertain origin and meaning. All that he can do in such cases is to gather together all the references he can find to that character and see if there is some common denominator in the stories or epithets which will give a clue on the meaning of his name. Anyone who has tried this procedure on his own account or studied in detail the efforts of others will know too well that the results are often at best tenuous, and the exercise, to say the least, frustrating. One problem is that the same god or hero is differently described in different places. Zeus merits distinctive epithets and a worship in Athens and in Crete, for example. What you expect of your god depends on your physical and spiritual needs in the immediate situation, and the stories you make up about him will reflect the social and ethnic conditions of your own time and place. Clearly, the mythologist can best estimate these local and temporal factors in his material if he knows the god's original place in the order of nature, that is, if he knows the source and meaning of his name. The dramatic step forward that is now possible in our researches into the origin of Near Eastern cults and mythologies arises from our ability to make these decipherments. We can now break down god names like Zeus and Yahweh, Jehovah, and hero names like Dionysus and Jesus, because it is possible to penetrate the linguistic barriers imposed by the different languages in which their respective literatures have reached us. We can reach back beyond the Greek of the classics in the New Testament and the Hebrew of the Old Testament to a linguistic source common to all. Furthermore, as might be expected in such a limited geographical area as the Near East, we find that not only have the names a common derivation, but many of the religious ideas variously expressed by the different cultures stem from the same basic ideas. The forms of worship, as far as we can reconstruct them from our limited literary and archaeological evidence, may appear quite unrelated, and the stories that circulate about the gods and heroes may reflect different social and ethnic backgrounds, but the underlying themes are turning out often to be the same. The worshippers of Dionysus headed their cultic processions with an erect penis, while those of Jesus symbolize their faith with a fish and a cross, but essentially all represent the common theme of fertility and the creative power of the god. Even within the Bible, language has hitherto posed a major barrier to research into Christian origins. Jesus and his immediate followers are portrayed as Jews, living in Palestine and adopting Jewish customs and religious conventions. The religion propounded by the New Testament is at root a form of Judaism, but the language in which it is expressed is Greek, a non-Semitic tongue. Words and names like Christ, Holy Ghost, Jesus, Joseph, and Mary come through the Hebrew channels but have Greek forms of translations in the New Testament. The words of Jesus are quoted freely and often given the weight of incontrovertible authority, but in fact nobody knows for certain what he said, since what we have are translations of a supposedly Aramaic original, of which all trace has otherwise been lost. A large part of Christian scholarship has been devoted to trying to reconstruct the Semitic expressions underlying New Testament phraseology, with varying degrees of success, but with little absolute certainty. In the forms in which we know them, Greek and Hebrew are very different in vocabulary and grammatical structure. They belong to different language families, the one Indo-European, like Latin and English, the other Semitic, like Aramaic and Arabic. Translations from one into the other can be at times extremely difficult, since they express not only distinctive linguistic attitudes, but underlying philosophies. One impediment to mutual understanding between the Semitic and non-Semitic world today is that mere mechanical translations of, say, Arabic words into English cannot express adequately the intention of the speaker, and dangerous misunderstandings can too often arise as a result. What we have now discovered is that by going far enough back in time, it is possible to find a linguistic bridge between these ethnic and cultural groups. However far apart the respective languages and philosophies may have become, they stem from a common recoverable source, and it is there that any realistic study of Christian and Jewish origins must begin. The root of Christianity is in this sense lies not in the Old Testament, but like that of Judaism itself, in a pre-Semitic, pre-Hellenic culture that existed in Mesopotamia some 2,000 or 3,000 years before the earliest Old Testament composition. The Christian doctrine of the fatherhood of God stems not from the paternal relationship of Yahweh to his chosen people, but from the naturalistic philosophy that saw the divine creator as a heavenly penis impregnating Mother Earth. The idea of divine love came not from the Israelite prophet's revelation of the forgiving nature of his God, but from a very much earlier understanding of the essential need for balance and reciprocation in nature, moral as well as physical. And that's the end of chapter 1.